One of the things I love about Cornerstone is the fact that we pour into our people. And we just got back from our sales conference and we had Erwin McManus speak. And I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what business you're in. It doesn't matter whether you work inside the home, outside the home. It really doesn't matter. He was so poignant and so on point with his messaging about resilience, about fear, about tackling those barriers that so often we do to ourselves. And for that reason, I just wanted to share this with you. Hopefully you will take away some of the nuggets. I had pages and pages of takeaways from our 45 minutes with Erwin. So this is my gift to you. Erwin is amazing. I would follow him. I would check out him. He's an author, all the things, but really this 45 minutes was magic. Please watch it and tell me what you think.
Good morning. You guys are incredibly high energy. Makes me very nervous. Kelly, thank you so much for inviting me. And I know for many of you, this is the first time that we've ever met or interacted. And so I just want to begin by telling you a little bit about my own background as we dive into conversation around Mindshift. I'm actually an immigrant from a small country called El Salvador. English is my second language. I learned it here when I came to the States. I was raised for the first several years of my life by my grandparents. I never met my father, and my mom was a stewardess for Pan Am. She's one of the first stewardesses in the world, and so she was flying around the world while me and my brother were being raised by her grandparents. And then when I was around 4 or 5 years old, she came back to El Salvador and brought us to the States, documented. And just thought I'd throw that out there, yeah, no surprise guests coming in today. and that journey ended up with a lot of mental fragments, a lot of shrapnel. By the time I was 10 years old, I was in a psychiatric chair and in and out of a hospital for about 6 months. And we really struggled with mental health, with a sense of significance, with a reason to live. And so one of the reasons I love doing this is that one of the discoveries you make as you live your life is that the things that you go through that you think are just your struggles or your challenges or your dark places, they are the common place where all of us meet at different times in our lives. And it's how we win this battle in our inner world that will shape how we live our lives in the everyday reality. I look back at my life and I remember key moments that shaped how I saw myself, what I believed about myself. And one of the things that I began to discover as I looked back at my life was that, and maybe you know this experience, all the negative input you get in your life stays with you. And all the positive input you get seems to flow right through you. In fact, if I were evaluating human beings, we're sort of a defective species, like factory defects, because we remember everything that hurt us and forget so many times all the things that actually filled us with happiness. If you have hope, you can lose your hope in 5 minutes. But if you're bitter, it stays with you for years. What is it about us human beings where all the negative emotions and all the negative thoughts and all the negative material seems to become residential inside of our souls, inside of our brains and our minds? And yet those things that are so positive and whole and encouraging, they seem to become a vapor so quickly. I still remember the last teacher I spoke with in high school said to me. I was graduating high school. I went into my English teacher's class. I gave her about 20 to 25 short stories that I had not written all year. I turned them in on the last day. I upset her just a little bit. And she looked at me and she said, "Erwin, have you thought about going to college?" And I said, "Yeah, maybe." And she said, "You will never make it." And those words stayed inside of me because I resonated with everything she saw. I believe those things to be true. My stepdad, I get my name, McManus. And I don't know if you can tell, I'm Latino. I'm actually Spanish, but my first name is German, Erwin. My last name is McManus. Irish, I'm not German or Irish. But I have an alias because my mom remarried a guy involved in what we called creative underground economies. And so he was living in Chicago working with a really tight-knit Italian family, and made a mistake, stole like $1 million, ran for his life, went to Miami, needed a new identity, and he met my mom. 3 weeks later, they got married. She felt like she needed a father for her 2 boys, and he needed a family so he would not be killed. And he took us to a police station and convinced the police that we had been robbed from all of our IDs, and I walked out Irish that day. Talk about an identity crisis. You think you don't know who you are. I walked out McManus that day. I was Irish for the rest of my life. I celebrated St. Patrick's Day. I was fully committed to being Celtic. And in that journey, that marriage didn't go so well. There came a certain point when I was in high school that there was a physical altercation, and we never saw each other again. But when my son, Aaron, was 15 years old, he said, "Dad, I want to meet your dad. I want to meet the man that gave you the name McManus." And I said, "Well, we haven't spoken since you were born." And he goes, "Yeah, but I really want to meet him." So I found him across the country. We flew across the country, knocked on his door, had a few moments with him, and I will never forget what he said to me. Actually, what he said to my son. He looked at my son, Aaron, and he said, "I don't know what your dad has told you about himself, but he was just average. His brother, now he was exceptional. He was a great athlete, he was fast, he was talented, but your dad, he was just average." And I remember that moment saying, "Dad, what else would I say?" Of course, I told my son I was just average. And when we left that moment, I felt this deep heaviness, but not for why you would think. I didn't leave with this hollowness because the one conversation the dad that raised me said to my son that I was just average. What really affected me was that he was right. I was just average. I hid behind average all my life. We don't really say a lot of good things about average, but let me tell you, average is a safe place. No one hates you when you're average. No one loves you when you're average, but everyone likes you. When you're average, you never show up or stand out. There's safety and security. And in fact, I very much understand why people would choose to be average, because average is a safe way to live life. But here's the problem. You're in this room right now. So that means you've given up on average. You've refused to become average. You may not realize it, but you're askew on the human scale. Because the moment you decide to elevate, the moment you decide to become more than anyone else ever expected, the moment you decide to squeeze every ounce of potential or capacity or talent or intelligence out of yourself, you've now just become a minority report. You've become different. And I imagine some of you have already experienced this, that the moment you have any level of success, you start losing friends. The moment you experience success, suddenly life starts getting harder. It's not the way it seems looking from the outside. Success does not create the perfect environment or the perfect life. Success actually puts you in the pressure cooker of life. I am so grateful for that conversation with Bill McManus that he had with my son, Erwin McManus. Because what he did is he removed the curtain. He challenged me. Are you going to hide in the average all your life? Fortunately for me, somewhere in those 15 years, I'd already made that decision. There's something that happens inside of us when we decide average isn't good enough, that we will simply not settle for the status quo, that we will press ourselves to become the best version of ourselves. And so what I want to talk about for a few moments are the mental shifts that we need to make to become the optimal version of ourselves. Because one of the things that I've had the privilege of doing in my life, I'm much older than most of you in this room, and I now have a lifetime of coaching people who are in the top 1% in the world at what they do. And what's fascinating is that I've worked with people in the music industry, in the fashion industry, in the world of sports, and the world of business. But that's not actually where I learned my coaching skills. For 10 years, I worked with drug cartels and gangbangers and assassins in the world of drugs and prostitution. And I began to discover that many of the principles that applied in the darkest arenas that I could ever step into applied into every arena of life. Because the central question I kept asking myself was, why do some people change and some people do not? And frankly, that came for me out of my own faith journey. I'm a person of faith. I became a follower of Jesus when I was in college. But one of the things that really confused me was that I could interact with two people who both expressed the same faith, but one would change and one would not. And that would really bother me because I would think if you had a common belief system, you would have a common journey. If you both believed in God, if you both believed that you were created with significance, if you both believed that your life mattered, wouldn't both your lives move forward in a similar way? But it wasn't true at all. What I found is that many people could have common beliefs and have completely different mental structures. And that their mental structures were more defining and more predictive of their future. I love sports. One of the most wonderful privileges I've ever had was getting to spend some time as Sean McVay's mindset coach. He's my favorite coach. He's absolutely brilliant. And I couldn't believe I was being paid to interact with someone so much smarter than me. But that's okay. I'm okay with the way the system works. And interacting with him, one of the things that was just a reminder to me over and over again is that the internal battle is where things are won or lost. And so I was watching a boxing match. I love boxing. And it was a defining moment because the next day after watching that match or that fight, I came up with the concept for Mindshift. Sometimes you know exactly the moment a book comes to you. It was October 26, 1990, when I knew I would write this book. Because on October 25th, 1990, there was a fight between a fighter named Buster Douglas and a fighter named Evander Holyfield. And 8 months before that, on February 10th, there was a fight between Buster Douglas and a fighter named Mike Tyson. And if you follow boxing at all, you'll know who Mike Tyson is. Maybe the most violent, dangerous, terrifying boxer who's ever entered the ring. He didn't want to just beat his opponents, he wanted to destroy them. And when Buster Douglas entered the ring against Mike Tyson, he was a 42-1 underdog. He was not expected even to survive the first 3 rounds. But unexpectedly, Buster Douglas survived 10 rounds and then did the impossible. He knocks out Mike Tyson. It defines Tokyo for the rest of boxing history. But we really didn't know anything about Buster Douglas. Like, who is this guy? What made him this ferocious fighter? What created in him this ability to face down the most fierce boxer in history? How would he step into the ring next time? So 8 months go by, and we're ready for Buster Douglas to reveal to us who he really is. He shows up overweight, dramatically overweight, out of shape. In fact, the lure is that someone saw him in the mall in Las Vegas at McDonald's right before the fight. When he gets to the fight, he was clearly already prepared to lose. He was so out of shape and awkward and uncomfortable that by the 3rd round, Evander Holyfield knocked him out. He lays on the ground, not just defeated, but humiliated. So the next day, I'm driving through Dallas, Texas. I'm listening to sports radio, and I'm listening to 3 men talk about the fight the night before. And I love listening to analysis on sports. It's an addiction. And one guy said, why do you think Buster Douglas didn't even try? I mean, it would be one thing to show up and give your best and lose, but why do you think he didn't even try? Then the second guy said something that made me very uncomfortable. He said, yeah, Buster Douglas was a really nice guy. I think he's even deeply religious, like he's a Christian. I thought, oh, you had to be. And then the third guy said something that shook me. He said, some people are simply structured for failure. Some people are simply structured for failure. That's when the conversation was no longer about Buster Douglas. Now the conversation was about me. Am I structured for failure? Have I allowed the internal design of my mind to create a ceiling so low that average is the best I've got? Have I created internal structures or allowed those structures to be created in me consciously or unconsciously that snuff out my potential, my capacity? And of course, I'm an optimist. In fact, I'm a ridiculous optimist. I've been married to my wife, Kim, for almost 42 years. And we argue about, yeah, that's a huge feat, let me tell you. And being married for 42 years, we have fights all the time about optimism. Because my wife is a little bit more on, she would say, the realist side. I would call her maybe more pessimistic, if this isn't being recorded. And, but we're really open about it. She'll say, I'm just so sick of you being so optimistic. And I'll say, honey, it really bothers me that you're so pessimistic. You could just be more positive, more optimistic. And for the first 10 years of our life, she would concede that, yeah, I should be more optimistic. Yeah, I should be more positive. But after 40 years, that's way in the past. Now she's like, yeah, I'm a pessimist. I like it. You need to be less optimistic. Pessimism is my power. And I understand what she's actually saying. She's saying, I look at life realistically. I measure the worst case scenario, then I move forward. Some of you may relate to that. She goes, you sometimes don't even look at the situation realistically. You're always looking past. But I am very, very optimistic. So the moment I heard that phrase, some people are simply structured for failure, I had the thought, if a person can be structured for failure, they can be structured for success. And then I got excited because I didn't want to spend my life studying the structures of failure, but it was worth spending my life studying the structures for success. And that's what I was gifted to do, to spend my life with people who were so extraordinary, that lived in that 1%, and to pay attention to the mental structures that shaped their lives, and then to pay attention to the architecture of my own mind and begin to redesign my internal world. And that's what I want to invite you to do as well. Because you're here, so you are already successful. You're here, you're already on the other side of the divide. But I wonder how much untapped potential is still inside of you. I wonder how much is waiting to be awakened inside of your own soul. How much mental capacity and mental space you actually have that is still dormant inside of you. Because the battle you have to win isn't out there, it's in here. So I want to talk to you about 3 negative materials that will design your inner world and how to take that negative material and turn it into a positive force. Because sometimes I get frustrated. You ever listen to speakers who tell you, there's no such thing as fear, and you're like, wow, it feels real. Right? There's no such thing as pain. You're like, oh, wow, that really hurts. Right? And people say, failure isn't real. It's all just learning. I'm like, wow, felt like failure, looked like failure, had all the effects of failure and many of the consequences. And so I like being more realistic and looking at those negative experiences, those negative materials, and then identifying how they shape who we are, and then how to reverse the effect of those negative materials and use them as the fuel that moves you forward. Because all of us will deal with these negative ingredients inside of us, and the first one is fear. I don't think there's ever a place in your life that you get to where fear doesn't have the potential to seep into your soul. In fact, some of you may be so optimistic right now, and you're cheering everybody on, and you're celebrating life, but you are fighting and struggling against fear right now. And what's really interesting about fear is it doesn't know how to categorize itself. Once you're afraid in one area, that fear has a way of seeping into every area of your life. And so you may say, oh, I'm only afraid of this. I'm not afraid of everything. I'm just afraid of this one thing. But that one fear doesn't allow itself to be categorized. It seeps into your soul and makes you afraid of life. Isn't it fear is such an interesting kind of internal dynamic? When people say, what's that acronym? Like, it's like fear is something that doesn't exist, or you're focusing on things that are not real. I'm going, no. See, my wife is in Africa right now, in Malawi. She goes there multiple times a year. She's built schools and housing and brought electricity and lighting to villages that have never had any of the modern conveniences that we have. And she's been in places where there are lions and leopards and some of the most dangerous animals in the world. See, if a lion is chasing you, fear, I think, is a very intelligent response. Like if you're not afraid, there's something psychologically broken inside of you. When someone says, I'm not afraid of anything, I go, wow, you've never been outside. Because there are a lot of things out there that can be really terrifying in life. And the reality is that fear is a survival mechanism, that fear properly placed is your brain informing you that you need to make a choice or you will die. Not to get too bleak. But the problem is that fear doesn't know how to measure itself. When you feel fear, when a lion is coming to eat you, it's the same fear you feel when you have to show your parents you made a D on your report card. And it's the same fear you feel when you're not sure if you could make the next sale. Fear doesn't have a way of describing its intensity. It just becomes fear. I'm so afraid. Because it becomes elusive and ethereal, and you now aren't struggling with a fear, you are now defined by fear. Now, when I was a kid, I thought some people were just sort of like heroic. You ever just look at people who are just courageous and think, wow, how did they get like that? Because I used to think, there's sort of like a genetic code for heroes, and then there's us. Because I definitely had the genetic code for fear. And they were rational fears. They made perfect sense to me. When we were living in El Salvador, we were just little boys, me and my brother Alex, he's older than me by about 2 years. We were walking down a street, and we almost never got to walk in El Salvador. It's a very dangerous country, or it used to be. And as we were walking down the street, an animal came out of the bushes and came at us, and it made the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard in my life, and I was paralyzed with fear. And I just turned around and reached up, and my uncle, Richard, picked me up and held me, and in my little mind, I thought, I'm safe. My brother went to my uncle, but I got there first. Almost the only time I ever beat my brother to anything. But I was there first. And he went to my aunt, and she tried to pick him up and couldn't. And it was coming at us. And my brother panicked and ran for his life. And when I came back to the States, I realized the animal that caught him and bit him was called a basset hound. And I'd never seen one in my life. It was terrifying. And it made a deep, deep sound. And it bit him in the butt. And I was afraid of dogs from that moment forward. Now, my brother, he was never afraid of dogs because it bit him. He experienced it and knew the full extent of that pain. Besides, he never saw it. But I saw it. It was traumatizing to me. And so I actually grew up with a fear of dogs. And it's a terrible thing because when you're afraid of dogs, you just avoid dogs. And it wasn't that obvious until I get married, then I have a kid. And, now I remember one time I was still afraid of dogs. I mean, I've just jumped any dog, yappy dogs. It just, Labradors, poodles, it didn't matter. Chihuahuas, it was an irrational fear I would project on that animal. And one time I'm pushing my son in his little baby carriage, and a woman had her dog, and she had him on a leash, but he lunged from the leash at me, and I put the carriage in between me and the dog, and here, take my child, just don't hurt me. And in that moment, I realized I have to deal with this irrational fear because this is bad parenting. And the only way I could get over that fear is to spend time with dogs, and spend time with dogs, and spend time with dogs, and even spend time with aggressive dogs that might actually bite me to actually deal with the reality that there's a real possibility that fear might become real. But I also was afraid of heights and afraid of fast-moving things because some of you might be old enough. Do you remember those carnivals that would just show up in town with rides that should not be legal? You know, we went to one of those carnivals in Miami when I was growing up, and we got on one of these rides, I think it was called the Polar Express, and it was going round and round. This is the 60s, and going round and round, and the seatbelt was rotted away and it just broke while we were going round. And my friend is holding on. He's about to be splattered outward, and I'm about to be sucked into the engine, and it's going faster and faster. And the guy he was so stoned. He was smoking weed while he was running the ride. You want to go faster? And we're like, no. He's, you want to go faster? He never even saw us. He didn't see anything. And my heart was pounding, and I thought I was gonna die, and finally came to a stop. I got out of that ride, and I never got on a ride again for years. So afraid to die on a roller coaster. And so I would go to these carnivals and just play all the boring games while everyone else took the rides. And so I finally had to decide, face the rides, get on the ride, survive, live. Do what other 8-year-olds are doing now that you're 28. Just get on the ride and destroy the fear. Now, maybe I'm more fearful than you, but I have a sense that all of us have fears that we struggle with. And so then when I was around 20 years old, I made a psychological shift. I told myself, fear would be my guide. That I would not avoid what I was afraid of. I would actually move toward whatever I was afraid of. And it changed my life. And what's really crazy is by the time I was in my late 20s, a documentary team came from England to film work I was doing because I was working in one of the most dangerous, violent areas in the United States, walking into projects where cocaine was stacked to ceilings and armed guards with Uzi machine guns were at every single door, and they were wondering how I could do that. And it was because I used fear as my guide. Wherever I felt that twinge of fear, I moved in that direction. I just basically told my inner voice, oh, you're afraid? Thank you. My new direction for life. And it began redirecting everything in my life in the most powerful way. And it changed my life forever. And I'm gonna throw in this momentary faith experience, and I hope it doesn't make you too uncomfortable. But I was in, at that time, the highest crime rate, highest murder rate area of the United States. And I was in my girlfriend's car at that time, her yellow Pinto, which basically says, rob me. And my heart's pounding against my chest, and I'm thinking about starting to do a work there. But I couldn't get out of the car, I was so afraid. And so I just stopped in the middle of the street, and I just started to pray. And I was kind of new to faith and was just learning the Bible, and I'd memorized all the really optimistic verses. I can do all things, through Christ who strengthens me. Fear not, for I am with you. Be strong and of good courage. There's so many good verses just to help you through life. And I was praying, going, God, how am I supposed to be here if I'm so afraid? And then I heard this verse in the Bible that I'd never memorized. I don't know how it got into my head, but I heard this verse, to live as Christ and to die as gain. That was not encouraging. I was that was not helpful in any way. But I had this follow-up thought, if you'll just die right now, you can go where only dead men can go. If you'll stop living in fear and let fear be your driving agent, you will do impossible things. And it changed my life. See, on the other side of your fear is your freedom. Because if you're afraid of heights, you stay low. If you're afraid of the dark, you stay in the light. If you're afraid of people, you stay alone. If you're afraid of rejection, you never risk it, love. Your fear will establish the boundaries of your freedom. And if you'll use fear as a positive fuel, You're afraid to make that call. You're afraid to take that risk. You're afraid to scale. You're afraid to expand. You're afraid to grow. Just step into it. What's the worst thing that can happen? Yes, that's right, the worst thing. And you'll be okay. And one of the most powerful things about fear, and when people try to tell you, you can live your life without fear, I think they're being dishonest with you. I think you're psychologically constructed as a human being to always have to grapple with fear. And if you're not grappling with fear, you're not doing anything that presses you to be the better version of yourself. The moment you have a bigger vision, the moment you have a big goal, the moment you have a big dream, the moment you choose a big life, fear is gonna come and have a conversation with you and tell you you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not talented enough, you've messed up in the past. And if you can learn how to take that fear and use it as fuel, it changes everything. And for me, that was a life-altering moment when I decided to make fear my ally. Which is kind of funny because then as we had kids and our kids were 12, 13, 14 years old and 11, 12, 13, and my kids actually came to me and said, Dad, would you stop taking so many stupid risks? I go, why? He said, because we'd like for you not to die until we're 18. And literally my daughter said, we know you're going to die young. I surprised them. But we'd like for you not to die now. And I realized that what happened was because I used fear as my fuel, that now I was actually defined as a risk taker. It's crazy. People actually thought I had courage. No, I have so much fear that I had fuel to live a life that was beyond my wildest dreams. And my kids now tell me, Dad, you really traumatized us because you would fly into Pakistan, fly into Syria, go across the borders into Damascus. And I'd call them like at 2 or 3 in the morning and go, hey, I'm in this section of Damascus. If I disappear, just note where I'm at. I didn't think through how that would traumatize my 14-year-old son. But one of the things I taught them was that fear can be your ally. It doesn't have to be your limitation. So my son, Aaron, when he was 10 years old, it was funny. We were living in this 2-story house in LA, which is where we live. And he went on top of the sink in the 2nd-story bathroom and then crawled out of the little window onto the roof of the 2nd floor. And Kim and I are outside in the front yard of the yard, and here's our little boy on the roof of the house. He goes, Dad! Aaron! And Kim's like, what are you doing up there? Get back inside the house. And Aaron just ignored his mom, still doing that. And he said, Dad, can I jump? I said, what? He goes, can I jump? Do you think I'll make it? I said, oh, you will make it. I mean, you will definitely land on earth. And Kim's like, no, you can't jump. Get inside. He goes, Dad, can I jump? And I said, okay, well, let me ask you a question. Are you going to jump at some time when we're not here? He goes, I think so. I said, then you might as well jump while we're here. That way we can take you to the hospital. And my wife goes, are you out of your mind? You should not be a parent. And we've had that conversation so many times. And he goes, Dad, would you catch me? I said, well, I'll try. And I said, Aaron, I have a suggestion. He goes, what's that, Dad? I said, I think you need to get a running start and try to clear the concrete and land on the grass. He goes, well, good idea, Dad. And so he backed up, and I thought that roof was gonna collapse, but he just took a step back. He goes, Dad, catch me. I'm gonna try. He goes, I'm coming. And he just started running and jumped off the ledge of that 2nd-story house. And I almost caught him. I mean, almost. It's just like he went right through my arms and didn't break anything, by the way. Don't call, anyone. And the reason I did that is I wanted my son to know that he was capable of more than his fear told him he could do. And also, I was mitigating that risk. If that was my daughter, I would have said, no, she wasn't quite as athletic. But he was very athletic, and I knew he could do it. Now, I think one of the things that we've got to learn how to do is take controlled risks that push us and press us so that we can keep making fear less and less powerful in our life. Because your freedom is on the other side of your fear. Say that with me. My freedom is on the other side of my fear. Say that with me. My freedom is on the other side of my fear. Say that again. My freedom is on the other side of my fear. What freedom are you longing for that you need to get on the other side of your fear? The second element besides fear is pain. Now, I kind of have a dual relationship with those because they're very connected, but they're different. Because sometimes you can have a moment where fear comes seeping in at a level you don't expect, and sometimes it's just real. It was about 10 years ago when I couldn't get insured. I had a company, we were in the fashion, film, and tech industry, and my business partner wanted me to get a key man policy so that if I died, the company would be worth more. And I couldn't get this key man policy. I just couldn't get it approved for insurance. And finally we went to this old school doctor, and he sat down with me and my wife right before Christmas, and he said, "You have cancer." And because they had not detected it over several years, it was stage 4, and it had metastasized to different parts of my body. And one of the most peculiar things that happened in that time, because it happened around December 15th, and then I went to surgery around the first week of January in a 6-hour surgery. The strangest thing happened when I heard I had cancer. I looked at Kim, and she started crying instantly. Then when we told our kids that night, they were really traumatized. But I had the oddest personal experience. I never felt afraid. Now, I gave myself permission to feel afraid, but fear was never one of the emotions I grappled with. And I realized that for most people, what they think is fear is actually regret. It's not that you're afraid, it's that you regret the things you did not do. And so I didn't have this rush of fear because I didn't have this avalanche of regret. I'd lived the life I wanted to live. I'd made the choices I should have made. I took the risks. I lived the adventure. And I didn't want to leave my wife and kids behind. But the emotion of fear was not the shadow of regret. And what I want to challenge you in this moment is don't allow regret to feign as fear. Because for most of us, it's not fear, but regret that cripples us. But the cousin of fear is pain. Pain is one of those interesting human experiences that knows how to lie to us. In fact, I would just say point blank, pain is a liar. Just so you can have that settle in your soul. Look at the person next to you and just tell them, pain is a liar. How many actually work out or exercise? Raise your hand. Okay, just a few of you. Okay, we're gonna work on a new culture here, okay? All right. Well, what is to me so interesting is that the way your body actually moves toward optimal performance is your ability to endure pain. If you're not willing to endure pain, you cannot optimize your physical capacity. And we know that to be true physically, but we don't understand it to be true mentally and relationally and emotionally and also characterologically. Everything that is related to the optimal version of you only exists if you're willing to endure pain. So if you don't have any pain points in your life, it means you are not pressing yourself to your highest level of performance. Now, a pain is one of those fascinating things where the moment you think you've taken all you can, you're just about 20%. Your brain will tell you, that's all you can endure. And then you believe it. And then when you push through, you realize, oh, wow, I can do more. I can do more. I can do more. I remember one time I was going through physical therapy because I've broken almost everything on my body. And I was going through rehab. Oh, my wife says don't call it rehab. And I was going through physical therapy. And it hurt. And I looked at the therapist and I said, what are you trying to do, kill me? And she said, no, I'm trying to increase your capacity. But, that's the problem. All of us want increased capacity. Anybody here not want increased capacity? We all want increased capacity, but none of us want pain. But without pain, you cannot have increased capacity. And in fact, even physically, your ability to endure pain is directly related to your ability to recover more quickly or at all. I remember in my 50s, I blew out my knee. I had to go to a surgeon. And I went to one surgeon. It was so funny when I was, maybe 50 years old. And he goes, you can walk again. I'm like, that's supposed to make me happy. You can walk again. I said, what are we talking about? Walk again. I want to play basketball. I am still smoking every 22-year-old out there. I want you to make me better than you. I want you to give me a bionic knee. I want something that allows me to get excited about the future. And he said, I don't know if we can do that. So I left that surgeon. He was not my surgeon. I found Kobe Bryant's surgeon because I knew that man understood my soul. And he looked at my knee injury and goes, it's the same injury. And I said, can you get me back on the court? Send me in, coach. He goes, we can do the surgery. We can make you better than you. We can get you back on the court. I said, how long will it take to recover? He goes, that's an interesting question, he said. Some people never recover from the surgery. That's what he said. Some people it takes about 2 years, most people. Some it takes 9 months to a year. And I said, how long would it take Kobe? It was 3 months. I said, okay, that's all I need to know. And I said, can you predict how long it will take? He goes, we already know how long recovery will take before we do the surgery by a person's mindset. He said, you will recover in 3 months. They did the surgery, wheeled me to the edge of the hospital, and I said, how fast can I use this leg? And he said, how much pain can you endure? So when we got to the edge of the hospital, I pushed myself out and I walked to the car and I went and got breakfast. It hurt so bad, but I told myself, it's all about your ability to press through the pain. Because in the same way that your freedom is on the other side of your fear, your greatness is on the other side of your pain. There is nothing that could ever be defined as the best version of you, the great version of you, the extraordinary version of you that exists on this side of pain. It only exists on the other side of pain. And the amount of pain that you are willing to take on in your life will determine how much greatness you can squeeze out of yourself. When I did have that stage 4 cancer, the surgery was supposed to be about 2 hours. But it ended up being 6.5 hours because there was a complication that they didn't expect. Because when I was around, 10 or 11 years old, I ended up in and out of a hospital, and I had what they told me was psychosomatic pain. Are you familiar with that? And they told me that I had created pain in my brain that didn't exist in my body. And so it kept driving me to a hospital, because I was debilitated. I felt such pain in my stomach, and I couldn't control it. And so I have a scar in the middle of my stomach. It looks like I gave birth to a baby in a C-section. And what they did is they opened me up and did an exploratory surgery. They just opened me up to say, maybe there's something wrong with them. And after the surgery, I'm not sure why, but the people in my life decided to tell me that they found nothing, that it was just psychosomatic. And I already knew I was a head case, so it was easy to believe that. So all of my life, I told myself, you cannot trust the pain. It's a liar. And so I played sports and never paid attention to the pain. Broke all these bones across my hand and played 4 more games of high school football because I would just tell myself, the pain isn't real, even when it was real. And so I developed this odd relationship to pain where pain just didn't inform me. And now I'm in a 6.5 hour surgery. When I come out of that surgery, the surgeon explains to me, we didn't expect all the scar tissue in your body that didn't allow us to get to the cancer because somewhere in your life, you had a ruptured appendix that was untreated. And I looked back and I realized I actually had appendicitis. But they felt so bad that they didn't believe me, that they went ahead and told me that there was nothing wrong with me. I mean, how would I ever find out? Unless decades later I would have cancer, they would open me up and tell me, your appendix exploded. And it was a miracle you lived. And I realized, what I thought was psychosomatic pain was actually real pain. But that real pain that I thought was psychosomatic actually allowed me to push through pain and treat it as if it wasn't real. And it gave me one of my superpowers. Now, my wife, Kim, she is fearless. Man, when the war broke out in Ukraine, she was in Kyiv within weeks. When the conflict broke out in Gaza, my wife was in Israel and Gaza within days. When there is a global catastrophe, my wife is there within hours or days. And right now, again, she's in Malawi. She is just fearless, but she hates pain. And she has a terrible relationship to pain. And in fact, she had this, I guess, pulled muscle. And so, you know those Theraguns? So, we have a Theragun. And she goes, okay, you can do it. I'm telling her, look, let me just use the Theragun, try to help you, try to release the tension in your leg. And I turned it on, and she starts screaming, stop, I can't take it. And I said, honey, I don't know how that's possible because I haven't touched you yet. And the pain was all in her mind, and she was already bearing more pain than she could take. I think that's most of us. Most of us can't endure the pain that we imagine and never step into the pain that we can actually overcome. But your ability to endure pain, to face pain, to cross the line of pain will be the place where your greatness emerges. By the way, this is true in character too. Have you ever noticed that when you decide to be a better human being, it's hard? Have you ever just decided, I'm gonna be a better person? Anybody? I'm not gonna be impatient. I'm gonna be more forgiving. I'm gonna be less bitter. I'm gonna be more kind. Have you ever done that? Have you ever done the opposite? Have you ever just decided, I'm gonna be a nasty person. I'm gonna be bitter longer, deeper. Anybody? I think I'm done trying to be kind. I'm gonna be unkind. This integrity thing, way overrated. I'm just gonna lie through my teeth and be really good at it. Have you ever done that? No, you never have to make a decision to be the worst version of you. You just become the worst version of you when you make no decision, which I think is really irritating. I mean, as a human being, how is it possible that if we do nothing, we become the worst version of us? To become the best version of us takes work. It takes pain. It would seem like the default mode should be the best version, right? I'll just do nothing and just be good. I'll just do nothing and have integrity. I'll just do nothing and become my kindest self. I'll just do nothing and become my most courageous self. Every virtue that you will ever admire is hard. Being the best human being you can become requires pain. Is there anybody here ever been betrayed? Man, I have. Is there anything more painful than being betrayed by someone who's your friend? Do you know what's hard? Forgiveness. Wow, I don't know what muscle forgiveness requires, but it's harder than a sit-up. I mean, there are guys who have washboard stomachs, and that hard work pales in comparison to the hard work of forgiving. It pales in comparison to the hard work of having integrity. So whatever the reason is, let me tell you, if you do nothing, you will become the worst version of you. If you avoid pain, you will become the worst version of you. If you want to become the best version of you, you have to press and power through the pain. You have to do the hard work of being a person of integrity. You have to do the hard work of being a courageous person. You have to do the hard work of forgiveness. You have to do the hard work of releasing bitterness. You have to do the hard work of releasing negative emotions and choosing positive emotions. Nothing good comes naturally. It all takes a choice, a commitment, and a sacrifice. And so you have to deal with fear. How do you deal with fear? You realize your freedom was on the other side of your fear, so you press through, you press through, you press through. You have to deal with pain, and you realize that your greatness is on the other side of your pain. You have to press through. Oh, Anybody here familiar with that game called padel? Padel is like this racket sport that has glass encased around it. It's really fast, it's very intense. I've been playing padel for like 10 years, and my family's trying to get me to quit sports because, you know, I'm 67 and I get injured a lot. But I don't play against 67-year-olds because they're all like nearly dead. And so I'm like, I tried, you know, my wife goes, go play basketball with guys your age. I'm like, it didn't work. They're too fragile. I was like afraid to hurt them. So I play all my sports against like 25-year-olds, 35-year-olds. And so I played padel, but 18 months ago, I had a partner. He wasn't very good. But we were winning like 5-0, 5 games to 0. But my son was on the other team with a friend. And my son was very upset that we were killing them. So he dinked the ball over the net. And I did not want him to get the point, much less the game. So I ran full speed. I don't know why we were so far ahead. It didn't matter. It was irrelevant. But I ran full speed and I heard my hamstring explode and it threw me forward. And then as I was flying, I put my hand down. And then when I woke up, my arm was going in 2 directions at the same time. It was a complete 90-degree turn. And my elbow had completely come out of its socket, torn 4 ligaments, one completely, the Tommy John ligament is gone. And I'm laying there and I'm in so much pain, I can hardly even describe it. Everyone around me was traumatized and they had nightmares later. And they called the ambulance and it was so painful when they had to move my arm to, you know, make it look like it was connected. And then to move me into that, whatever that thing is, you know. And when they were putting me in the ambulance, they were gonna give me some kind of painkiller, which I don't take any drugs at all. And my son said, you're not allowed to give him that. He will not take that. And I go, well, we have morphine. He goes, you're definitely not allowed to give him that. So for the next hour, I have 0, not even aspirin, 0 painkillers, as they take me to the hospital and try to figure out how to reconnect my arm. And that was the last time I played padel for like 18 months, just because I had to rehab. And then I was in Mexico and I got a text. We rented padel courts this morning. Do you want to come play? And I had like a visceral response. I wanted to really bad, but it had been 18 months and I kept seeing that moment over and over and over again. I kept feeling the pain of that moment. And so I responded, oh, thanks so much for the invitation. Didn't bring shoes. And I'll have to pass. And so I just walked Mexico City for the next 5 hours, walked like 20 miles, just lamenting, I wish I'd played padel. I wish I'd said yes. But you know, I didn't bring my shoes, but you know, there are stores in Mexico. You can buy shoes. And I'm just going through this all day in my head. And then I realized, oh, it's not that I forgot my shoes. It's that I forgot my courage. I'm just afraid. Because the pain is telling me, never get on a court again. Never compete again. And I had tried just a couple of months before at Christmas. I told my wife, hey, I'm gonna go play padel. And she started crying. I said, please, we can't take it over the holidays. Could you wait till after Christmas? So it only reaffirmed the fact that I'm gonna get injured. And so I called those guys and I said, can you get a court tonight? And they said yes, and I went and bought some cheap shoes and showed up at the court, and I was terrified. It's the strangest thing. I have looked down individuals holding guns, holding me at gunpoint, and I've looked them down, and I felt no fear. But I was afraid to get on a padel court because the pain told me, do you really want to feel this again? You know why a lot of us don't risk at love? Again, because our brain says, do you really want to feel this pain again? You know why a lot of us don't risk in our businesses? Because do you really want to feel this pain again? You know why a lot of us don't push ourselves to become the best version of ourselves? It's because there's this little voice that says, do you really want to feel this pain again? Now I'm playing padel every week, and each time I can feel myself pressing through where pain and fear no longer have a voice in my head. And every single time I get just a little bit better. So last week I said to my son, are you ready? Because for what? For the day I'm the best player on the court. Because that's never gonna happen again, Dad. I go, I think it's already happened. Because it's already happened in my mind. The pain can't stop me. Where is pain stopping you? Where are your pain points that are keeping you from your greatness? And just one last element I want to focus on. One more negative material, and it's failure. Fear, pain, and failure are that devil's triangle that will keep you from the life that you're created to live. Now, I know there's a lot of conversations about failure. Failure isn't real. There's no such thing as failure. There's just learning. Okay, given all that, okay? No such thing as failure, but it feels like failure. Can we just accept the fact that when you fail, it feels like failure? But there's a difference between failing and being a failure. And this is the difference between people who move toward optimal performance. People who achieve the highest level of capacity never allow themselves to be defined by their worst moments. But other people will want to define you by your worst moments. And so if you lie, they'll say you're a liar. And that's, by the way, the terrible thing in parenting is when you tell your kid that they are their worst moment or they are their worst behavior. You stole something, but you're not a thief. You lied, but you're not a liar. You have to help your children define themselves by their best moments. And you need to do that for yourself. You failed, but you're not a failure. Because in the same way that your freedom is on the other side of your fear and your greatness is on the other side of your pain, your future is on the other side of your failures. And the only people who don't fail are the people who never try anything worth succeeding with. And so I used to have this idea that there's some people who never fail, and then there are all the failures in the world, and I realized, no, the people who succeed at the highest level are the people who fail and fail and fail and fail and fail, and they just never give up. It's the person who stops when they fail who actually gets defined by their failures. What's the greatest failure of your life? I think one of the great problems in organizations is that we only talk about successes. So we're cheering everybody on. You succeeded, yay! I can be like that. Wow, you're number one, you're the best. But when they don't tell you what it took to get there, it creates a mythology of greatness. I think Michael Jordan ruined it for everyone. I think Michael Jordan created a mythology of greatness that if you're great at something, it comes easy. Because no one saw his hard work. It just looks so elegant and so easy. And by the way, the best in the world, whenever they're doing it, it looks easy, doesn't it? You watch Tiger Woods, you go, I can do that. Look how easy it is. You watch Kobe, it's like just easy. Every time you're watching the best in the world, it just looks easy. Because it's the process that's hard, not the outcome. The outcome is natural. The outcome we saw was the natural result of the hard work we didn't see. And so it's so clear that your ideal future is only there on the path to your greatest failures. We should celebrate great failures. In fact, you ever have a moment where you're just like, wow, I don't know if I can overcome this? I've had so many failures in my life that I could spend the whole day just talking about failures. But I'm gonna pick one because it really hit me. I had a company, and we had a couple of fashion labels and a film division. We had the #1 ad rate commercial in the Super Bowl that year. We won the Echo Domani Award in fashion. You know, things were just flowing. Had a little tech company that we turned around from $20 million loss in one year to $9 million profit the next year. So we were like, we're feeling ourselves. We're doing good. And I had a business partner that had actually come to me and asked me to work with them. And then I got the strangest email from a dad. He said, I know you don't know me, but my daughter just survived a plane crash. And she's the only survivor. And she has 3rd-degree burns, and she had to crawl over her fiance who was burning to death. I mean, it was the darkest, bleakest note. He said, my daughter has lost her faith, doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in life, has no reason to live, but she listens to you. Is there any way you would be willing to send her a note or give her a call just to try to see if you could help? Well, my daughter's age was about the same as his daughter's age, and I called my daughter and I said, would you fly across the country with me to see this girl? She goes, yeah, of course. So I reached out to the dad and I said, I'm not gonna send you a note, I'm not gonna give her a call, we're gonna fly across the country or wherever you are, and we're gonna come see your daughter. Found out where they lived in Texas. We landed in Dallas, drove 3 hours or so to their house. And while we were there, maybe in my life I haven't done a lot of good things, but that was a good thing. It was just a truly benevolent moment just trying to bring a little peace or joy or hope to this sometimes dark and painful and bleak world. And we spent the day with them, and while I'm there, I start getting flooded with emails that my business partner has stolen my company. And I'm watching all these emails from attorneys dropping in while we're there trying to help this family. And I'm trying not to make this moment about me. I'm trying to make this moment about her, but my gut is just reeling. Not just from the loss of $10 million, but the loss of someone I trusted who was my friend. And I do believe in God, and I was like, God, really? This is your timing. This is how you think it should play out. I'm here trying to do something really humane, and you couldn't watch my back? I got no response on that one, but we drove back to the airport that night and I was sick. I had to fly back to LA to sit down with my wife. Now my wife Kim was an orphan. She was left abandoned in a government project when she was 8 years old, eating nothing but turnips and ketchup. She lived in a foster home from 8 to 18, never owning anything in her life, never being told, I love you one time. She was basically a child slave working a tobacco field in the mountains of North Carolina through the foster system. I had to fly home and tell my wife that I lost everything. It was probably one of the most humiliating and painful moments of my life. I waited till the morning. We went and got coffee I could no longer afford. And I said, honey, I lost everything. And without hesitation, my wife looked at me and she said, I thought I was your everything. I thought, who says that? No one says that. Jane Austen writes that. But no one says that. And I didn't have a romantic Mr. Darcy kind of response, so I just looked at her and I said, well, I lost my other everything, the everything that funds my everything, and then she looked at me and she said, we've been poor before. We're going to be fine. You always find a way. Because she remembered when we used to sleep on the floor because we couldn't afford a bed. She knew that there was no place that failure could ever keep us, because failure was simply the material for our future. Our kids were amazing, by the way, in that moment. They both came to me and said, we never thought they were the right business partner. And you're so loyal, you would have stayed with them till you died. Dad, this was the best thing that could happen for you. Now you get to start all over again. Didn't feel like that then. But one of the things I've learned through that was at that moment, if I had defined myself by that moment, I would have said, I am a failure. But what that moment did is it gave me the material from which I could create a different future. And the future that came after it was so much better than the future I lost before it. In fact, now I kind of consider myself in a very small elite category. I mean, there's a lot of people who've made 10 million, but very few people who've lost 10 million. I mean, I am in an elite group of people. Because the amount of failure you can endure will become a strong determination for what you will create. And so some of you, maybe this has been a hard year. Wow, government shut down, economy in a turmoil. I mean, the markets are insane right now in LA. Real estate is just chaotic. But it's these moments that define who you really are. And so step into this moment and know, even if it's difficult, you're going to make it through. And it will create a better version of you than you could have ever imagined. Man, I am so grateful for that moment on October 26th, when I heard that phrase that some people are simply structured for failure. Because I know without any doubt that we can be structured for success. You can take the negative materials of fear and pain and failure and turn them into the powerful, positive force that allows you to live your life at an optimal level. Thank you guys so much.
If you're at this point, you probably watched the whole thing like I have twice. Tell me what you thought. I mean, drop me a comment, send me a text, send an email. I would love to know your feedback and what you took from it that will help you in your everyday life.